Okay. I love you very much. I want you to know that, just going in, yeah. Did you have fun?
No one ever imagined that a titan like Robert De Niro, the face of American cinema, the embodiment of raw power and controlled rage, would end up alone, quietly fading behind the curtains of Hollywood. There was a time when every whisper he delivered on screen could silence a room. Now, his silence is real. It echoes in the halls of a grand home that once hosted legends, but now hears only the hum of forgotten memories. What happened to the man who gave us Travis Bickle, Jake LaMotta, and Vito Corleone? Why does a life filled with Oscars, applause, and adoration end in such deafening quiet? This is not the story the media tells you. This is not the De Niro they put on red carpets. This is the Robert De Niro you were never meant to see. Before he became a legend, Robert De Niro was just a quiet boy walking the cracked sidewalks of Little Italy, New York. His eyes too deep for his age, his silence louder than the traffic around him. Born in 1943 to artists, his father, Robert De Niro Sr., a respected abstract painter, and his mother, Virginia Admiral, a poet and painter. You might think his childhood was filled with beauty and expression, but what most don't know is that behind every canvas, there was conflict. Behind every stroke of color, there was emotional absence. His parents separated when he was only 2 years old. His father, a closeted gay man in a time when society had no space for such truth, left the family home, creating a hole in young Robert's life that was never quite filled. His mother worked tirelessly, but emotionally, Robert was often left to fend for himself. He once said, "I watched everything. I listened more than I spoke. That's how I survived." And survive he did in the shadows, in libraries, in the corners of art studios where his father painted with the intensity of a man battling demons no one else could see. School wasn't kind to him. He was shy, painfully introverted, often called Bobby Milk by neighborhood kids for his pale skin and fragile appearance. But even as a child, De Niro was already rehearsing not for a role, but for life, learning how to blend in, to observe, to wear masks when necessary. He found refuge in cinema. The local theaters became his sanctuary, the dark rooms a safer place than the daylight streets of Manhattan. He would sit for hours, studying Brando, watching Cagney, dissecting every movement not as a fan, but as a student of pain. These men, fierce and larger than life, gave him a blueprint. Not for fame, but for how to be seen without speaking. His first role wasn't in a film, it was at home. Playing the son who didn't ask questions, the child who didn't cry when his father forgot birthdays or holidays, the boy who didn't complain when he felt more like a ghost in his own family. At just 10 years old, he joined a local drama workshop. It was the first time he was encouraged to speak emotions he never dared voice. And he did, but always through characters, never as himself. The tragedy of his early life wasn't loud. It was the quiet kind. The kind where birthdays pass unnoticed, where "I'm proud of you" is never said out loud, where the only applause comes from the echo of imagination. A friend once recalled seeing him as a teen, sitting on a bench for hours, staring blankly into space. When asked what he was doing, De Niro answered, "I'm practicing stillness." That stillness would become his trademark, that silence, his weapon. But back then, it was just a boy, learning to live without being heard. Robert De Niro's journey into acting wasn't a fairy tale. It didn't begin with a golden opportunity or a lucky break. It began, as many great stories do, with failure. He dropped out of high school at 16 to pursue acting full-time, a decision that horrified his mother but thrilled something buried deep in his soul. He enrolled at the Stella Adler Conservatory and later at Lee Strasberg's legendary Actors Studio. These names were giants in the world of theater, but for Robert, they were lifelines, rare places where he could disappear into someone else and finally be seen. His first auditions were disasters. Casting directors called him too intense, too quiet, not charming enough. He was told to smile more, to speak louder, to act like a star. But De Niro wasn't trying to be a star. He was trying to be real, and Hollywood wasn't ready for that yet. He failed his first major screen test, then the second, then the third. He worked as a busboy, a delivery driver, even as a construction laborer, jobs that kept him close enough to the city's energy, but far enough from its spotlight. Every night, he would return home to read scripts he wasn't cast in, lines he'd never get to say. But he didn't give up. A young director named Brian De Palma took a chance on him in 1968's Greetings. The film wasn't a hit, but something about De Niro stuck: his gaze, his rhythm, the way he could make silence feel louder than dialogue. Then came the moment that would begin to shift everything. Mean Streets, 1973. Martin Scorsese, still early in his own career, saw in De Niro what the industry had missed: a powder keg of emotion hidden under deliberate calm. As Johnny Boy, De Niro wasn't acting, he was detonating. Explosive, unpredictable, magnetic. Hollywood didn't know where he came from, but they couldn't look away. Scorsese later said, "Bobby was the kind of actor who disappeared into the skin of his characters. He didn't want to be seen. He wanted to be felt." From there, the roles came, but not the kind that screamed box office. De Niro turned down commercial roles to take the hard ones, the broken ones. He wasn't afraid to bleed on camera, to gain 60 pounds for Raging Bull, to learn Sicilian for The Godfather Part 2, to work with ex-cons to prepare for Cape Fear. He wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing truth. But the journey was never smooth. Even after winning his first Academy Award for The Godfather Part 2, he still faced doubt. Studio heads questioned if he was bankable, if he could sell tickets. For every Oscar nomination, there was a headline questioning his methods, calling him difficult, cold, too serious. Yet, De Niro never flinched. He kept choosing roles that hurt, roles that healed, roles that revealed how deeply he understood pain. And while the world began to applaud, Robert himself remained eerily quiet. He never did it for the praise. He did it because, for a boy who grew up unnoticed, disappearing into someone else was the only way to finally feel alive. By the late 1970s and into the 80s, Robert De Niro was no longer just an actor. He was a phenomenon, a method-acting god, a legend in the making whose name alone could carry a film to critical acclaim. He had done what few ever could: win 2 Academy Awards before turning 40, for The Godfather Part 2 and Raging Bull, and in the process, redefine what it meant to transform for a role. He was not just playing characters, he was becoming them. In Taxi Driver, his haunting whisper, "You talkin' to me?" became a cultural imprint, repeated, referenced, revered. In Raging Bull, he brutalized his own body, gaining over 60 pounds, shattering teeth, and bruising his soul to portray the volatile Jake LaMotta. In The Deer Hunter, he wore silence like armor, showing the aftershock of war without ever needing to explain it. Directors adored him. Scorsese called him a partner in madness. Coppola called him dangerous in the best way. Every serious filmmaker wanted De Niro. Every ambitious actor wanted to be him. From the outside, he had it all: critical respect, global fame, and the kind of artistic freedom others only dreamed of. He co-founded the Tribeca Film Festival. He built restaurants, invested in film production, curated a brand of quality and integrity. He had worked with legends: Al Pacino, Meryl Streep, Joe Pesci. He had helped make legends. For years, he was the face of American drama, a living symbol of artistic excellence. But inside, De Niro was slipping further away from the world. Friends said he became increasingly withdrawn. He avoided interviews. He didn't enjoy press tours or awards ceremonies. He rarely gave speeches unless necessary. He wasn't arrogant. He was simply elsewhere, detached, like a man playing himself in a movie he didn't write. He was known to disappear for weeks between films, not for vacation, but to decompress from the emotional violence of his roles. He poured everything into his characters, and when they were gone, he was left hollow. Relationships were casualties of his craft. His first marriage to Diane Abbott ended in divorce. Subsequent relationships followed the same pattern: love, distance, silence, collapse. De Niro once said in a rare, candid moment, "Acting is like a confession, but sometimes you tell the story so many times you forget what's real and what's not." He had wealth, he had respect, he had a place in cinematic history. But the one thing he couldn't seem to hold on to was peace. Fame followed him everywhere, but so did solitude. In crowds, he stood alone. In interviews, his eyes looked past the questions. His smile, if it came, was never quite full. As he aged into the 90 seconds and 2000 seconds, he became something even rarer. A revered elder statesman of film. He could do no wrong in the eyes of critics, but in his own eyes, the lines on his face told a quieter truth. He had everything except the ability to truly enjoy it. For a man who had played so many tortured souls, it was cruelly poetic that Robert De Niro's most painful moments came not in front of the camera, but in the stillness between roles, when the crowds disappeared and the lights turned off. In 2003, he faced one of his most terrifying real-life battles: cancer. Diagnosed with prostate cancer at the age of 60, De Niro chose to keep the fight private. No public statement. No fanfare. Just quiet resilience. He underwent surgery and survived, but those closest to him said something inside him changed. Not just physically, spiritually. He became more distant, more guarded, and more bitterly aware of his mortality. Then came the fractures in his personal life. His second marriage, to Grace Hightower, began with hope but unraveled slowly, painfully. Their divorce, finalized in 2018, was more than just legal, it was emotional warfare. A 20-year relationship ending in courtrooms, accusations, and public headlines. For a man who had always protected his private life like a fortress, this was humiliating exposure. He was aging, he was alone, and for the first time, he was no longer in control of his narrative. In 2020, the world watched as De Niro, once the highest-paid actor of his time, admitted during legal proceedings that he was struggling financially. Not broke, but overextended. Lavish lifestyle demands, lawsuits, taxes, and failed investments had caught up with him. The press feasted. Headlines read, "De Niro can't retire. A legend in debt. Hollywood royalty, but at what cost?" The very industry he helped build now seemed eager to tear him down. But the deepest wound of all came in 2023, the death of his grandson, Leandro, just 19 years old, an accidental overdose, a tragedy that shattered him in a way no role ever could. He didn't speak to the media. He didn't cry on camera. But those who saw him at the funeral said he was barely there, walking, breathing, but not present. A man who had portrayed grief so convincingly now stood face to face with a grief that no script could soften. In an old interview from the 1990 seconds, De Niro once said, "I've spent my life pretending. Maybe that's why I feel so much when the pretending stops." And now, the pretending had stopped. His roles became fewer, his steps slower, and his voice, once a thunderous whisper in cinema, began to fade. The young firebrand of Taxi Driver now shuffled through interviews, often looking lost, sometimes even confused. Online critics accused him of selling out with commercial roles, Netflix comedies, or political statements. But they missed the bigger picture. This wasn't a man chasing relevance. This was a man trying to outrun the echo of his own legacy. He had become a monument, revered, untouchable, but utterly alone. In the wake of loss, scandal, and physical decline, most actors would fade quietly into memory, clinging to past glories. But Robert De Niro, even in his silence, found a different kind of resurrection. Not in the movies, not in applause, but in moments no one saw. After the death of his grandson, De Niro reportedly withdrew from the spotlight almost entirely. But behind closed doors, something shifted. He began spending more time with his children, especially his youngest daughter, born just recently in 2023, when he was 79. Yes, at nearly 80, he became a father again. Many mocked him for it. Late-night hosts turned it into punchlines. The internet exploded with headlines like, "Too old to parent?" and "De Niro's final act, diapers and bottles." But he didn't respond. He didn't need to. Because for the first time in decades, he wasn't playing a role. He was simply being there. Present. Holding a child not for the camera, but for comfort, for connection, for healing. Those close to him noticed he no longer spoke much about films or fame. Instead, he talked about time, about what he regretted, about what he never said to the people he lost, about how strange it was to be remembered by millions and yet feel forgotten in his own home. He reportedly began writing more, not scripts, but letters. Unsent letters, to his father, to his grandson, to his younger self. A source close to the family shared, "He talks less now, but listens more. His eyes don't burn the way they used to, but they hold something softer like forgiveness." He didn't chase redemption. He didn't give speeches about change. But he changed. He donated quietly to mental health organizations in honor of his grandson. He made appearances at small film schools to encourage the next generation, not with advice, but with honesty. "Don't let your art replace your soul," he told one class. "I did, and I'm still trying to get it back." It wasn't a dramatic comeback. It wasn't an Oscar-winning final performance. It was something smaller, something purer. A man learning to be more than the sum of his characters. A man learning finally how to live when the cameras stop rolling. Once, Robert De Niro stood at the center of cinema, fierce, magnetic, unforgettable. Now, at 82, he walks slower, speaks softer, and sits longer in silence. But if you look closely, there's still a fire behind those weathered eyes, not of ambition, but of memory. He no longer chases the spotlight. He no longer needs it. And yet, isn't it haunting that a man who gave us some of the most unforgettable faces in film could grow old, largely unseen? The boy from Little Italy, who was once too quiet to be noticed, became a man whose quiet changed cinema forever. And now, in the final chapter, that silence has returned. But this time, it is peaceful. Perhaps this is the truth behind legends. They burn brightly not because they seek attention, but because they carry pain so well, the world mistakes it for brilliance. So if you're watching this, and his story touched something in you, a memory, a sorrow, a regret, then leave a word for him, not as a fan, but as a witness. Because somewhere tonight, in a quiet room far from red carpets and flashbulbs, Robert De Niro may be sitting in silence, wondering if any of it truly mattered. And maybe, your voice is the one that finally tells him it did.